Okay, take a seat. Get comfortable. Sometimes, life throws these curveballs that seem designed purely to knock the wind out of you. And often, it's the very ground you thought was most solid beneath your feet, your work, your loyalty, that suddenly gives way. But here's a quiet truth. Sometimes being pushed out is the only way to discover where you truly belong, and maybe, just maybe, find a strength you never knew you possessed. Let's step into the world of a man named Mark Harrison. Mark was 50 years old, a seasoned professional, the kind of guy who remembered birthdays and asked about your kids before ever mentioning business. He was a senior client relations executive at Apex Solutions, a company right here in Phoenix, Arizona. For 15 years, he hadn't just worked there, he'd poured his lifeblood into it, building their client portfolio from practically nothing into the bedrock of their success. He wasn't just an employee, he was part of the foundation. And then, one Tuesday morning, under the fluorescent hum of the office lights, it all unraveled in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. An 8-minute conversation, that's all it took to dismantle 15 years. Across a sleek, imposing glass desk sat Brendan Kelly, the new regional director. Brendan was 34, all sharp angles and ambition, dressed in suits that probably cost more than Mark's first reliable car. He had this way of talking about disruption and synergy, like they were menu items at the trendiest downtown cafe. He rarely made eye contact, especially not with Mark. When he did, it wasn't hostility, exactly. It was something worse, impatience. Like Mark was an old rotary phone in a world of gleaming smartphones, functional, sure, but hopelessly outdated, taking up space. "We need younger talent, Mark," Brendan said, his voice lacking any real warmth, his eyes flicking over Mark's personnel file as if it contained ancient hieroglyphics he couldn't quite decipher. "People who'll work for half your salary. You're just too expensive for where we're headed." The words hung there in the air-conditioned chill. Too expensive. After 15 years of bringing in millions, of being the steady hand clients relied on, he was boiled down to a number on a spreadsheet. A cost to be cut. Mark had sensed this coming for months, like the low rumble of distant thunder before a storm. Ever since Brendan had arrived 6 months prior, swept in after the founder, George Thompson, retired, the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers of restructuring, modernization, cost-cutting, echoed through the halls. Those familiar corporate euphemisms that almost always meant someone experienced, someone loyal, someone who remembered the company's roots, was about to be deemed surplus to requirements. Brendan continued his monologue, barely pausing. "The market's changing, Mark. We need agility. People who understand digital natives, social media engagement metrics, the whole 9 yards. You know how it is." Oh, Mark knew. He just fundamentally disagreed with the premise. He knew that when Jim Sterling from Keystone Industries faced those crippling production delays that nearly bankrupted his family business, it wasn't a social media campaign that saved him. It was Mark, spending a whole weekend restructuring Jim's payment schedule, talking him off the ledge, finding a path forward when everything looked bleak. He knew that when Sarah Mitchell from Ridgeline Corp tragically lost her husband, it wasn't an automated email that offered comfort. It was Mark, personally driving the contract extension papers to her home, sitting with her for an hour, making sure she knew her business was secure, that she had one less thing to worry about amidst the grief. Those weren't data points, they were human connections, built over years of trust, countless phone calls, hundreds of face-to-face meetings, solving problems that no algorithm could ever touch. But Brendan wasn't interested in those stories. They didn't fit on his PowerPoint slides. He saw Mark's salary, a significant figure reflecting 15 years of dedication and results, and all he could visualize was slicing it in half, maybe even more, by hiring a fresh-faced graduate eager to make their mark for a fraction of the cost. Mark felt a strange calm settle over him. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet resignation mixed with something else, a nascent flicker of resolve. He met Brendan's gaze, holding it for perhaps the first time during the entire conversation. "I understand completely, Brendan," he said, his voice steady. He stood up and offered his hand. Brendan looked almost surprised, then visibly relieved by Mark's lack of drama. He shook Mark's hand quickly, mumbling something about professionalism and wishing him well. Later that afternoon, as Mark was packing the contents of his office, 15 years of memories, awards, and relationships, into a single, standard-issue cardboard box, Diane from accounting appeared hesitantly in his doorway. Diane had been with the company almost as long as he had. She had that worried look, the one people get when they see injustice happening and feel powerless. "Mark, you okay?" she asked softly, her eyes scanning the half-empty shelves. He managed a small smile. "I'm fine, Diane." Really, and strangely, in that moment, he almost meant it. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a clarity he hadn't expected. She leaned in closer, glancing nervously down the empty corridor. "They don't know what they're losing," she whispered fiercely. "Brendan's got the board completely snowed. Thinks he's some kind of tech visionary." Mark just nodded, taping the box shut. What Diane didn't know, what Brendan certainly couldn't comprehend, was that Mark wasn't just packing up his desk. He was already thinking several moves ahead. Because while Brendan was mesmerized by spreadsheets and buzzwords, Mark was remembering phone numbers, direct cell numbers, not office lines. He was remembering promises made and kept. He was remembering 15 years of clients who, when they had a problem or needed advice, didn't call the Apex Solutions main line. They called Mark Harrison directly. You see, Mark had joined the company back when it was still called Western Business Solutions. It was a tiny operation then, just 3 employees crammed into a windowless office fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer ambition. George Thompson, the founder, was a former salesman himself, a gruff but fair man who lived by a simple creed. People sign contracts with people. Mark, he'd drill into him constantly. Not logos, not companies. People. Remember that. Mark remembered. He'd lived by those words every single day for 15 years. He was the first call clients made when things went wrong, the trusted advisor they sought out before signing multi-million-dollar renewals. His personal cell phone held more vital client connections than the entire corporate directory. That dedication, though, had come at a personal cost. His marriage to Nancy hadn't survived it. They'd divorced 8 years ago, the relentless demands of building Apex Solutions, prioritizing client emergencies over family dinners, contributing significantly to the breakdown. His daughter, Chloe, now 23 and forging her own path, had spent much of her high school years seeing her dad mostly on weekends, if he wasn't traveling for work. Thankfully, she understood better now, or at least, she tried to. Chloe was, in fact, the very first person Mark called after that brief, brutal meeting with Brendan. He sat in his car in the company parking lot, the single cardboard box beside him feeling both heavy and insignificant. "Dad, what happened?" he told her. "They did what?" Her voice crackled with immediate outrage, fierce loyalty flaring up. "After everything you've given them? Dad, that's just wrong." "It's business, sweetheart," Mark said, trying to keep his own voice even, though her anger was a bomb. He started the car, the engine turning over smoothly, a stark contrast to the sudden disruption in his life. The new director wants his own team. Younger, cheaper. But it's not just business. It's your life. 15 years. She wasn't wrong. But Mark found himself strangely uninterested in litigating the fairness of it all right then. His mind was already shifting gears, focusing on what came next. Because this hadn't come entirely out of the blue. The signs, subtle at first, had been accumulating for months. George Thompson retiring last year was the first major tremor. He'd sold his majority stake to an investment group that made all the right noises about preserving the company culture, valuing the employees, respecting the legacy. Standard procedure. Then, 6 months later, Brendan arrived like a conquering hero, armed with slick PowerPoints, an MBA pedigree, and a vocabulary heavy on terms like synergy, market penetration, and client acquisition cost. Suddenly, the quarterly meetings felt different, colder. Nobody talked about relationships anymore. It was all about metrics, scalability, efficiency. The human element seemed to have been deemed inefficient. About 3 weeks before the axe fell, Mark had been walking past the main conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and he'd overheard Brendan's voice, crisp and confident, talking to someone from Human Resources. The legacy staff compensation structure, Brendan was saying, is significantly out of alignment with current industry benchmarks. Especially in client relations. Legacy staff. That's what he was now. Not a veteran, not experienced, not loyal. A legacy. Like an outdated piece of software needing to be decommissioned. A relic. That word had stuck with him. He'd gone back to his office that day feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. And he'd done something proactive. He pulled up his contact list, not the company's clunky CRM system, which he rarely used anyway. No, he accessed his personal records, meticulously maintained over 15 years. Names, direct cell numbers, notes about kids' graduations, spouses' names, favorite restaurants, vacation homes, golf handicaps. The kind of deep, personal knowledge you couldn't just download from a database. Information built on genuine connection. Then, he'd made a quiet phone call. To Ethan Cole. Ethan was an old colleague, a sharp guy who'd left Apex Solutions, back when it was still Western Business Solutions, 5 years earlier to join a rising competitor, Summit Partners. They'd kept in touch, grabbing lunch every few months, sharing industry gossip, maintaining that professional camaraderie. "How's things over at Summit Partners treating you, Ethan?" Mark had asked casually during that call, keeping his tone light. "Growing fast, Mark, really fast," Ethan had replied enthusiastically. "Actually, funny you should call. We were just talking internally about expanding our client relations team. Looking for someone senior, someone with real depth." Mark remembered smiling faintly into the phone. "Oh really? That's good to know, Ethan. Very good to know." So, when Brendan finally summoned him to that glass-walled office for the 8-minute execution, Mark wasn't just blindsided. He already had Ethan Cole's formal offer letter, outlining a position and compensation package at Summit Partners, sitting securely in his personal email inbox. He hadn't accepted it yet, but knowing it was there, well, that changed everything. It wasn't just a safety net, it was the first thread in a new tapestry he was already beginning to weave in his mind. 3 days after being unceremoniously dismissed from Apex Solutions, Mark found himself sitting in his car again, this time parked discreetly in the lot of the Crestwick Golf Club. He watched as Brendan Kelly's expensive sedan pulled into a prime spot near the clubhouse. Brendan emerged, looking pleased with himself, adjusting the collar of his polo shirt. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, tea time, and waiting for him near the entrance, looking polite but noticeably reserved, was Jim Sterling from Keystone Industries. Mark's biggest client for the past decade, the man whose business Mark had helped save. Mark watched them shake hands. Brendan was all expansive gestures, wide smile, radiating confidence. Jim's smile, Mark noted, didn't quite reach his eyes. From his vantage point, Mark could almost feel the awkwardness, the forced pleasantry. Brendan was trying to step directly into Mark's shoes, attempting to inherit a relationship built over years of shared challenges and mutual respect, simply because he now held the title. And that's when it truly crystallized for Mark. Brendan didn't just want to replace him. He genuinely believed that client relationships were transferable assets, like office furniture or software licenses. He thought he could just schedule a meeting, play a round of golf, talk about synergy, and magically replicate 15 years of trust. Meeting by meeting, handshake by handshake, he was trying to overwrite Mark's legacy with his own superficial charm. Watching them walk towards the first tee, a profound sense of clarity washed over Mark. It wasn't anger simmering anymore, it was a cool, focused determination. He started his car, not with frustration, but with purpose. He drove straight downtown, to the sleek offices of Summit Partners. Ethan Cole met him in the lobby, a look of pleasant surprise on his face. "Mark, hey, I thought you were taking the week to think over our offer." "I'm done thinking, Ethan," Mark replied, his voice firm. "But I want to modify the terms slightly." They went into a quiet conference room overlooking the city. Mark laid out exactly what he needed. Not just a job, but a platform. Complete autonomy over client onboarding. The authority to structure his own team. And, crucially, he needed assurance, ironclad assurance, that Summit Partners would not enforce any potential non-compete clauses against his former clients if they chose to follow him. He wasn't asking Summit to poach. He was asking them to welcome clients who might independently decide to make a move. Ethan listened intently, then picked up the phone and called in Patricia Lennox herself, one of the firm's founding partners. Patricia was sharp, direct, and known for her strategic mind. She listened patiently as Mark reiterated his position and his requirements. "You're essentially asking us to facilitate you bringing your established client base with you, Mark," she stated calmly, her eyes studying him intently. "I'm not taking anything that doesn't already belong, in essence, to the relationship I built," Mark responded, meeting her gaze without flinching. These connections, this trust, it exists because of 15 years of dedicated work, Patricia. The contracts might technically belong to Apex Solutions on paper, but the loyalty? The trust? That was built person to person. That belongs to the relationship, and right now, I am that relationship for these clients. Patricia Lennox held his gaze for a long, measuring moment. Mark could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the risk, the potential reward, the character of the man sitting opposite her. Then, she gave a single, decisive nod. All right, Mark, you make it happen, demonstrate that loyalty is truly with you, and the terms are yours. Welcome aboard. That evening, Mark sat alone at his large oak kitchen table. The house felt quiet, too quiet sometimes since the divorce, but tonight the silence felt different. It felt purposeful. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and his personal cell phone beside it. He didn't feel vengeful or bitter. He felt centered, focused. This wasn't about getting even with Brendan or Apex Solutions. This was about honoring the work he'd done, validating the principles George Thompson had instilled in him, and ensuring the clients he cared about continued to receive the support they deserved. It was about respect. His daughter Chloe called while he was carefully making his list, circling names, adding little notes only he would understand. Hey Dad, her voice was warm, concerned. How are you doing? Like, really doing? He paused, considered it honestly. How was he doing? Surprisingly, okay. More than okay. Better than expected, sweetheart, he told her truthfully. Sometimes, you need a hard push out the door to realize you were standing in the wrong room all along. Helps you see where you actually belong. So, she asked, hope tinging her voice, what's next? What's the plan? Mark looked down at his legal pad, at the 10 names circled in blue ink. I'm starting over, Chloe, he said. Then he smiled slightly, but not exactly from scratch. After they hung up, he opened his laptop. He didn't draft emails to the executives themselves, not yet. Instead, he composed carefully worded, personal messages to their executive assistants. The gatekeepers, the people who really knew the schedules, managed the access, and often, understood the nuances of the relationships far better than anyone gave them credit for. Mark had always treated them with the same courtesy and respect he showed their bosses. He knew their names, asked about their families, remembered small details. His email was simple, direct, and honest. Hi, assistant's name. Hope you're having a good week. Just wanted to let you know personally that I've transitioned to a new role at Summit Partners. I'd really appreciate the opportunity to briefly update client's name when their schedule permits. No pressure at all, just wanted to share the news myself. No hard sell, no desperation, just a professional courtesy, letting them know where he'd landed. By midnight, sitting there in the quiet glow of his laptop screen, he had responses from 7 of those assistants. And the message, consistently, was the same. Mark, good to hear from you. Yes, client's name, definitely wants to talk. When are you free? He closed the laptop, feeling a sense of profound rightness, a quiet satisfaction that settled deep in his bones. He went to bed and slept more soundly than he had in months. Tomorrow was day one of demonstrating to Brendan Kelly, and perhaps more importantly, to himself, the true, tangible value of 15 years of building relationships, one conversation, one act of trust at a time. Tomorrow, the real work began. Mark's first call the next morning wasn't to an office number or through an assistant. He dialed Jim Sterling's direct cell number, the one Jim had given him years ago for emergencies. Jim picked up on the second ring. Mark, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Jim's voice was filled with genuine warmth, and maybe, Mark thought, a touch of relief. Had that, golf meeting yesterday with your replacement. There was a slight pause. Nice enough young fella, I suppose. But wow, spent 4 hours listening to him talk about synergy and leveraging platforms. Didn't once ask how my daughter Sarah did on her MCATs, even though I know you told him she was taking them last month. Mark smiled faintly. That's actually why I'm calling, Jim. Wanted to let you know personally, I've moved over to Summit Partners. He paused, letting that sink in. But listen, this isn't a sales call. Truly, if you're happy with the service and the direction at Apex, that's genuinely all that matters to me. Your business continuity comes first. The silence on the other end lasted only a heartbeat. Then Jim chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Mark, you know damn well my loyalty isn't to Apex Solutions, especially not now. It's to the guy who answers his phone on a Sunday night when my plant's underwater, figuratively speaking. Send me the paperwork for Summit Partners. We follow you. Just like that, no hesitation. By the end of that first week, Mark had similar conversations with 6 other key clients. Each conversation followed the same pattern. No aggressive poaching, no bad-mouthing Apex or Brendan. Just simple honesty. I've landed at Summit Partners. It's a great firm, focused on the client relationship aspect. If you ever feel you need a different approach, I'm here. If you're content where you are, I completely respect that and wish you all the best. They weren't content. They all wanted to make the move. The trust Mark had painstakingly built over 15 years was proving far more resilient, far more valuable, than Brendan Kelly could ever have imagined. It was Sarah Mitchell from Ridgeline Corp., the woman Mark had helped during her time of grief, who gave him the first heads up about the pushback. "Mark, just wanted you to know," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I got a call yesterday from your old company." From that young man. Brendan, was it? Sounded quite agitated, started talking about breach of contract, saying clients couldn't legally follow you. Got quite aggressive, actually. Mark felt a flicker of annoyance, but mostly, he was prepared for this. "Thank you for letting me know, Sarah. I appreciate the heads up. Don't worry about it on your end." He immediately called Ethan Cole at Summit Partners. Ethan, unflappable as ever, connected him straight through to Summit's in-house legal counsel. The lawyers reviewed Mark's old Apex employment contract, which Mark had foresight Edley provided. They confirmed exactly what Mark suspected. Yes, there was a standard non-solicitation clause, meaning Mark couldn't actively try to lure clients away. But there was absolutely nothing preventing clients from choosing to follow him of their own free will. His communication had been careful, simply informing them of his new position. As long as you haven't been actively poaching, using confidential Apex information to undercut them, or making false promises, you're clean, Mark, the lead lawyer assured him confidently. He's bluffing, probably panicking. The very next morning, Mark arrived at his spacious new office at Summit Partners, an office with a window, overlooking the bustling city, to find an email waiting for him. The sender, Brendan Kelly. The subject line screamed, "Cease and desist, urgent." Mark opened it, reading through the predictable corporate bluster. Threats of imminent litigation, accusations of tortious interference with client contracts, demands for the immediate return of all proprietary client information. It was aggressive, bordering on frantic, and it ended, almost comically, with an offer. "Happy to discuss terms of a potential settlement before this unfortunate situation escalates further." Mark printed the email, a slight smile playing on his lips, and walked down the hall to Ethan Cole's office. He handed it over without a word. Ethan read it quickly, then looked up, a thin, knowing smile spreading across his face. Wow, he's really panicking. The Apex board must be breathing down his neck, asking some very pointed questions about client retention. "He doesn't understand what's happening," Mark replied quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "He genuinely thinks I somehow stole something. He can't grasp that this is about loyalty, about relationships he never bothered to value." Later that afternoon, Mark's personal cell phone rang. It was Diane, the accountant from Apex, her voice hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Mark, it's Diane. Listen, things are intense over here. Full meltdown mode is putting it mildly." "What's going on?" Mark asked, keeping his voice calm. "Brendan's been locked in emergency meetings with the board all day. They're throwing around terms like client retention bonuses, emergency outreach programs. It's chaos. And Mark, get this, he told them you must have hacked the CRM system. Said that's the only way you could possibly be contacting clients so effectively." Mark couldn't help but laugh, a short, incredulous bark. "Hacked the CRM? Diane, you know me. I barely knew how to log into the CRM. All my important contacts were in my personal system." "I know, that's why I had to call you. They're actually bringing in an outside cybersecurity firm to do a full forensic audit of the CRM system activity logs, looking for evidence of a breach by you." Mark processed that. An audit, an expensive, time-consuming audit. "And when they don't find a single trace of unauthorized access by me," Mark finished her thought, "they'll have to admit I didn't steal or hack anything. The clients left for other reasons." "Exactly," Diane whispered urgently. "But Mark, please be careful. Brendan is scared. He's desperate. He promised the board he could slash costs without losing major clients." Now he's lost 7 cornerstone accounts in less than a week. He's looking for a scapegoat, and right now, that's you. Mark thanked Diane for the invaluable intel and hung up, feeling a complex mix of vindication and pity for Brendan's predictable tactics. He immediately called Patricia Lennox, updated her on the situation, the CRM hacking accusation, the impending audit. Patricia wasn't fazed by the legal threats. Summit's lawyers were already prepared. But she was genuinely impressed by the speed and scale of the client migration. 7 major accounts, Mark, she said, her voice holding a note of undisguised admiration. Transferred in just 5 business days, without a single formal sales presentation or proposal needed. I've been in this business a long time. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's not about sales pitches, Patricia, Mark reiterated calmly. It's about 15 years of trust. It's about answering the phone. Just as he was packing up to leave his new office for the day, feeling a sense of cautious optimism, his phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. This is Brendan Kelly. We need to talk. In person. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Copper Blues Cafe, downtown. This doesn't need to get any uglier. Mark read the message twice. He showed it to Ethan, who immediately advised against it. Don't go, Mark. He's desperate. It's a trap. He'll try to twist something you say. But Mark felt differently. He'd faced down client crises, navigated complex negotiations, handled delicate situations for years. Running from this felt wrong. Cowardly, even. No, Ethan, Mark said firmly. I want to hear what he has to say. I think it's time we had a face-to-face conversation. Let him see this isn't happening because of some nefarious plot. It's happening because of him. He texted back a simple reply. See you there. The next morning, Mark arrived at Copper Blues Cafe 15 minutes early. He chose a booth in the back, offering a clear view of the entrance but also a degree of privacy. He ordered a black coffee and waited, feeling surprisingly calm. Brendan walked in precisely at 9:05, scanning the busy cafe with an air of forced importance until he spotted Mark. He strode over, attempting his usual confident gait, but Mark could see the underlying tension tightening his shoulders, the slight unease in his eyes. Mark, thanks for coming, Brendan said, sliding into the opposite side of the booth without preamble. He waved away the server who approached. I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot initially. Mark didn't respond. He just took a slow sip of his coffee and waited, letting the silence hang. Brendan cleared his throat, leaning forward conspiratorially. Look, he began, his voice lower now, trying for a man-to-man tone. Let's cut to the chase. What's it going to take to stop this client exodus? The board is absolutely breathing down my neck. Whatever Summit Partners is paying you, we can match it. Hell, we can beat it. Plus a substantial signing bonus to come back. Just make this stop. And just like that, hearing the naked desperation, the immediate assumption that this was purely about money, Mark knew. He knew he had Brendan exactly where he needed him, operating from a place of complete misunderstanding. Brendan, Mark said simply, his voice quiet but firm. I'm not interested in coming back to Apex. Brendan's practiced professional smile faltered, flickering like a faulty neon sign. Okay, then what do you want? Some kind of consulting arrangement? Finder's fees for the accounts you're transitioning? He was grasping at straws, trying to frame this in the only language he understood. Transactions, deals, money. Mark took another slow, deliberate sip of his coffee, setting the cup down gently in its saucer. Brendan, you still don't get it, do you? He asked, not unkindly, more with a sense of weary realization. This isn't about money. Brendan scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. Mark, come on, everything is about money. Business is money. And that, Mark said, leaning forward slightly, meeting Brendan's gaze directly, is precisely why you're losing. Those clients, Jim Sterling, Sarah Mitchell, the others, they aren't following me because Summit offered better rates or some flashy new service package I pitched them. They're following me because for 15 years, I answered their calls on Saturday afternoons. I remembered their kids' names and asked about their college applications. I flew out on short notice when they had a crisis. I treated them like valued partners, like people, not like entries on an accounts receivable ledger. Brendan's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. That's all very touching, Mark. Sentimental. But let's be practical here. Name your price. What will it take for you to stop actively poaching our client list? I haven't poached anyone, Mark stated calmly, holding his ground. I haven't breached a single clause in my contract. I simply informed people I've known for years where I landed professionally. They are making their own informed decisions based on their own assessment of where they will get the best support and value. It's their choice, Brendan, not mine to dictate. Brendan leaned back against the booth, studying Mark as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. The board isn't happy, he admitted, his voice losing some of its bluster. They brought me in to modernize, streamline costs, drive efficiency, not hemorrhage millions in established accounts practically overnight. And who did they blame when you had to report those losses? Mark asked quietly, watching Brendan's reaction closely. Brendan flinched, almost imperceptibly, but Mark saw it. That's not relevant to this discussion. Oh, I think it is, Brendan. It's very relevant to me. Mark leaned forward again, lowering his own voice slightly. Because I'm guessing you didn't tell them the whole truth, did you? I bet you didn't explain that you summarily fired the one person who was single-handedly responsible for nurturing and maintaining those key relationships, all without bothering to understand the depth or nature of that connection. I bet you didn't admit that you looked at my salary not as an investment in client stability, but purely as a liability to be cut. Brendan's jaw clenched visibly. They understand that necessary restructuring sometimes comes with temporary disruption. Mark raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call losing nearly 30% of Apex's entire annual revenue base in less than a week? Temporary disruption? That hit the mark. Brendan's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. 30%. Mark could see the gears turning, the panic rising. 30? He clearly hadn't grasped the full financial impact of losing those specific 7 clients. Yes, Brendan, those 7 clients, the ones who've already initiated transfer paperwork to Summit Partners, represent almost a third of Apex Solutions' total annual billing. But you wouldn't necessarily know that, would you? Because you were too busy looking at salary spreadsheets and cost-cutting projections, instead of client value reports and relationship histories. The color visibly drained from Brendan's face. Mark knew, in that instant, that Brendan had been trying to manage the narrative with the board, downplaying the severity of the losses, perhaps hoping he could stem the tide before they realized the true scale of the damage. How many more are at risk? Brendan asked, his voice barely above a whisper now, the earlier confidence completely gone. Mark looked him straight in the eye. Honestly, Brendan? Potentially all of them. Every single major client I personally managed for the past 15 years has reached out to me or my team at Summit already. I haven't even had to make the outbound calls yet. Brendan stared at him, speechless for a long moment. Finally, he rallied, trying one last bluff. What happens if I go back to the board right now and tell them you've been actively soliciting our clients using proprietary information? That you took confidential files? Then you'd be lying, Mark replied calmly, without heat. And the expensive IT audit you commissioned will prove you're lying. I didn't take a single document. I didn't download a single file. I didn't breach a single confidence, corporate or personal. The only thing I took with me, Brendan, was 15 years of relationships that I built, personally, brick by brick. You can't threaten me with falsehoods. The facts will bear me out. Brendan drew back as if physically struck. How did you know about the IT audit? Mark just offered a small, knowing smile. People talk, Brendan. People talk to people they trust. That's another fundamental aspect of this business you don't seem to understand. Just then, Brendan's phone buzzed loudly on the table between them. He glanced down at the screen, and whatever he saw caused a fresh wave of panic to flash across his face, quickly masked, but Mark saw it. I need to take this, he stammered, standing up abruptly, nearly knocking over his untouched water glass. We're not finished here. But as Mark watched Brendan hurry outside, phone pressed tightly to his ear, his shoulders slumped in a way they hadn't been just minutes before, Mark knew, with absolute certainty, that they were finished. Whatever storm was brewing back at Apex Solutions, it was accelerating far faster than Brendan could possibly control. The foundation wasn't just cracking, it was crumbling beneath his feet. Later that same afternoon, back in the calm, professional environment of Summit Partners, Ethan Cole stopped by Mark's office door, a slightly puzzled expression on his face. Mark, you just got a call transferred up, Ethan said. From a George Thompson? Said you'd know who he was. Mark felt a jolt of surprise, followed by understanding. George Thompson, the founder of Apex Solutions, the man who'd hired him 15 years ago, the one who had retired and sold the company. His former boss, his mentor. Yes, George Thompson, Mark confirmed. Former boss, former owner. Did he leave a message or a number? Said you'd have his number, Ethan relayed. And he also said, and I'm quoting him directly here, tell Mark the board called an emergency meeting this afternoon. They want to talk to him yesterday. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sounds urgent. Mark nodded slowly, not entirely surprised. Thank you, Ethan. After Ethan left, Mark leaned back in his comfortable new office chair, the view of the Phoenix skyline stretching out before him. He considered his next move carefully. George wouldn't have called, wouldn't have involved himself after retirement, unless something truly significant was happening at Apex. The panic Brendan had shown at the cafe suddenly made even more sense. The board wasn't just asking questions, they were taking action. Mark picked up his personal cell phone and dialed George Thompson's number from memory. George answered on the first ring, his voice gruff and familiar, no time wasted on pleasantries. Mark? George here. They're in a full-blown panic, son. George, good to hear your voice. What's happening? Mark asked, keeping his tone even. What's happening as the board finally woke up and smelled the coffee? George grumbled. When they realized exactly which clients had jumped ship, Sterling, Mitchell, the whole core group you built, they called me, demanding to know what the hell was going on. Wanted to know if I had any insight. Mark leaned back further, a sense of weary validation washing over him. And what did you tell them, George? I told them the goddamn truth. George practically roared into the phone. I told them the only reason Apex Solutions had such a stable, high-value client base for the last decade and a half was because of you, Mark Harrison. I told them you were worth every single penny they paid you, and probably a damn sight more. I told them they let some slick-talking MBA kid flush 15 years of loyalty and hard work down the toilet because he dazzled them with spreadsheets about cost-cutting. Mark felt a genuine warmth spread through him. I appreciate that, George. More than you know. It's not about appreciation. George retorted gruffly. It's about common sense. It's about recognizing value. It's about the fact that business, real business, is run by people who build trust, not by algorithms. Anyway, the upshot is, the board is holding an emergency session as we speak. And they want to know, they asked me to ask you, if you would consider coming back to Apex. Mark wasn't entirely surprised by the offer, but it held absolutely no appeal for him. George, I appreciate the sentiment, truly. But I'm settled here at Summit Partners now. Patricia Lennox and Ethan Cole took a chance on me, they've backed me completely. Settled, with 7 of Apex's biggest clients now happily signing your Summit contracts, George noted dryly. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, then decided on full transparency. Actually, George, it's likely to be 10 by the end of this week. 3 more are finalizing their paperwork right now. A low whistle came through the phone line. 10? Good Lord, Mark. No wonder they're panicking. 10 accounts, that's got to be, what? 45% of Apex's total annual revenue? 46%, George, Mark corrected quietly. There was a moment of stunned silence on the line. Then George chuckled, a sound mixing admiration and exasperation. 46%. You always did know everyone's numbers better than they did themselves, didn't you? Okay, Mark, okay. So, coming back is off the table. I respect that. What's your play here, then? Because right now, that board is desperate enough to offer you Brendan Kelly's job on a silver platter if they thought it would stop the bleeding. The thought of sitting in Brendan's chair, wielding that kind of direct power over the company that had discarded him, it was tempting, Mark had to admit, for about 3 seconds. Then he remembered Brendan's dismissive tone, the casual disregard for 15 years of unwavering loyalty, the reduction of his career to a mere line item on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. No, that wasn't the answer. George, Mark said firmly, I'm not interested in Brendan's job. His fate is the board's decision, not mine. He paused, formulating the idea that had been slowly taking shape in his mind over the past couple of days. But I am interested in something else. Something potentially better for everyone involved. Name it, George said instantly. A strategic partnership, Mark proposed. Between Summit Partners and Apex Solutions. A formal agreement for shared client services, specifically for those key accounts, the ones I brought over, and perhaps others, that could genuinely benefit from the combined strengths and specialties of both firms. George was silent for a moment, clearly processing the unexpected suggestion. Hold on, let me get this straight. You want the Apex board to authorize a formal partnership with the very company that is currently, as you just told me, gutting nearly half their client list? I want them to recognize reality, George, Mark corrected calmly but firmly. At the rate things are going, Apex won't have enough major clients left to sustain its current operations or staffing levels within a few months. They'll face massive layoffs, maybe even insolvency. But a structured partnership? It could stabilize both companies. My clients, our clients, get access to the best specialized services from both firms, a seamless experience. Apex retains a significant portion of the revenue from these accounts, instead of losing it entirely. Summit Partners gains market share and strengthens its position without engaging in a destructive, zero-sum war. It's a win-win-win. And Brendan Kelly in this scenario? George asked, his voice neutral. That, as I said, is the board's decision, Mark replied evenly. I have no interest in his future, George. My only concern now is for the clients who deserve continuity and the best possible service, and frankly, for the good employees still at Apex, like Diane, who've been caught in the middle of Brendan's disastrous restructuring. George Thompson let out a low chuckle, the sound filled with grudging admiration. Mark Harrison, you always were better at playing the long game, the chess game, than anyone ever gave you credit for. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. He paused. All right, it's unconventional, bold, even, but it makes a hell of a lot more sense than letting the ship sink. I'll present it to the board. They're reconvening tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I'll lay it out exactly as you propose. After ending the call with George, feeling a sense of clarity and purpose he hadn't felt in years, Mark immediately asked Patricia Lennox to come to his office. He walked her through the entire conversation with George, and then carefully laid out his partnership proposal. Patricia listened intently, her expression unreadable, occasionally jotting down a note on her legal pad. When Mark finished, she looked at him thoughtfully. This is unusually generous, Mark, she said finally, her voice measured. Strategically, we could just sit back, wait another month or two, and likely pick up most of the remaining key clients when Apex inevitably implodes under its own mismanagement. We could potentially absorb their entire high-value portfolio. We could, Mark agreed readily. But Patricia, that path, while potentially more profitable for Summit in the short term, would cause significant disruption for the clients we just promised stability. And it would hurt a lot of good, innocent people, the rank-and-file employees at Apex who would lose their jobs because of one man's arrogance and short-sightedness. This way, this partnership model, both companies can thrive. The clients get truly optimal, integrated service. And nobody else has to pay the price for Brendan Kelly's mistakes. Patricia studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. You really aren't doing any of this for revenge, are you? Revenge is messy, Patricia, Mark said quietly, looking out the window at the city below. It's wasteful energy. I'm not interested in tearing something down just for spite. I'm interested in building something better, something stronger, something more sustainable. For everyone, the next morning felt charged with anticipation. Mark tried to focus on work, catching up on emails, reviewing client files, but his mind kept drifting back to the Apex board meeting happening across town. His phone finally rang at precisely 9:45 a.m. It was George Thompson. Mark, George's voice was calm, efficient. They're in. The board has approved the strategic partnership proposal in principle, pending final legal review of the details. Full agreement. There was a slight pause, then George added, almost as an afterthought, oh, and Brendan Kelly has been asked to tender his resignation, effective immediately. Mark closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the news wash over him. Not triumph, not elation, but a deep, profound sense of relief. A weight he hadn't even fully realized he'd been carrying seemed to lift from his shoulders. And the employees, George? Mark asked, his voice quiet. The team at Apex? No further restructuring related to this, George confirmed. The board members admitted, rather sheepishly I might add, that they got too caught up in Brendan's rhetoric about cost-cutting and efficiency metrics. They forgot what actually makes the damn business work. Relationships, trust, people like you. Mark thanked George sincerely and hung up the phone. He sat there for a moment, simply breathing. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about getting revenge on Brendan. It was about setting things right, about restoring balance, about proving that the principles he'd built his career on still mattered. Patricia Lennox appeared in his doorway a moment later, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. Mark met her gaze and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "We have a deal, Patricia," he told her. "Apex accepted the partnership proposal. Now we get to build something even better than either company could have managed alone." Patricia's smile widened. "Extraordinary, Mark, absolutely extraordinary. All because they underestimated the quiet guy who just nodded politely and walked away with 15 years of trust in his back pocket." 6 weeks later, Mark stood at a podium in the largest conference room at Summit Partners. The room was filled with familiar faces, clients from both Summit and Apex, board members from both companies, key staff members mingling together. Today marked the official announcement and celebration of the new strategic partnership. Brendan Kelly, of course, was nowhere to be seen. The last Mark had heard, through the industry grapevine, was that Brendan had landed a position at a struggling tech startup down in Tucson. Perhaps, Mark mused, a place where aggressive cost-cutting was not only expected but necessary for survival. Mark looked out at the attentive crowd, spotting George Thompson in the back, beaming with pride. Beside George stood Diane from accounting, along with several other long-serving Apex employees whose jobs were now secure, their expressions a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Today marks the beginning of something truly unique in our industry," Mark began, his voice steady and clear, resonating with quiet confidence. "This isn't a merger. It's not an acquisition. It's a true partnership, founded on a shared understanding that lasting business success isn't built on spreadsheets alone, but on the strength and integrity of human relationships." The partnership agreement itself was elegantly simple, designed for maximum client benefit and operational synergy. Clients involved in the partnership would choose their primary service provider, either Summit or Apex, but would gain seamless access to the specialized expertise and resources of both firms. Revenue would be shared fairly based on service utilization. And critically, the client relations teams handling these key accounts, drawn from both companies, would be unified under Mark's leadership, ensuring consistency and the relationship-first approach he championed. After the formal announcements and applause, as people mingled and networked, Jim Sterling from Keystone Industries sought Mark out, shaking his head in genuine amazement. "Mark, when you first told me you were leaving Apex," Jim said, clapping him warmly on the shoulder, "I was ready to follow you anywhere, no questions asked. Summit, wherever. But this," he gestured around the room at the combined gathering, "this is even better. You somehow managed to turn getting fired into the best possible outcome for literally everyone involved. Well, everyone except the poor fool who fired you." Sarah Mitchell from Ridgeline Corp joined them, nodding emphatically. "That young man, Brendan, he never had a clue what he was throwing away when he let you walk out that door," she said softly, her eyes meeting Mark's with understanding. "But we knew, Mark. Your clients knew." As the event began to wind down, Patricia Lennox found Mark standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Phoenix skyline as the afternoon sun cast long shadows. "The boards of both companies are calling it a masterstroke, Mark," she said quietly, standing beside him. "In just 6 weeks, you've not only stabilized Apex but fundamentally transformed the competitive landscape, strengthened Summit's position immeasurably, and secured a level of client loyalty that most firms only dream of. It should last for years." Mark shook his head slightly, a humble gesture. "I didn't really do anything revolutionary, Patricia," he replied thoughtfully. "I just reminded everyone of something fundamental, something George Thompson taught me 15 years ago, something that somehow got lost in the shuffle of modernization and metrics. Business isn't ultimately built on cutting costs. It's built on building relationships." Patricia smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "And revenge, Mark?" she asked softly, teasingly. "Was any part of this, even a tiny part, about revenge?" Mark turned from the window, meeting her gaze. "The best revenge, Patricia," he said, his voice calm and clear, "wasn't taking the clients away from Apex. It was creating a situation where everyone could see the right way, the better way, to keep them." About a month after the partnership launch, Mark left the office a little early. He was meeting Chloe for dinner. His daughter had been following the entire saga with a captivating mix of daughterly pride and sheer astonishment at the turn of events. "So, let me get this straight, Dad," she said, leaning forward excitedly as they settled into their favorite Italian restaurant booth. "Technically, you're now actually more powerful in the industry than you were before you got fired, right?" Mark chuckled, shrugging slightly as he picked up his menu. "Sweetheart, it's really not about power. It's just about doing things the right way." treating people decently. Okay, Chloe persisted, clearly enjoying the irony. But still, the guy who fired you is gone, completely sidelined. You've basically got key parts of 2 major companies reporting into your structure now. And all your biggest clients think you're some kind of business turnaround genius. I'm just a guy who answers his phone on weekends, Chloe, Mark said, smiling genuinely now. That's all it ever was. Later that night, driving home to his quiet house, Mark reflected on the whirlwind of the past few months. From the sting of that abrupt dismissal, the feeling of being discarded after years of loyalty, to inadvertently reshaping a significant portion of Phoenix's corporate services landscape. It truly had never been about getting back at Brendan Kelly. It had always been about proving, perhaps more to himself than anyone else, that the values he'd upheld, the relationships he'd nurtured for 15 long years, had real, tangible, lasting worth. The next morning, arriving at his Summit partner's office, Mark found a small, unassuming package sitting squarely in the middle of his desk. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple, black picture frame, and within the frame was an old, slightly faded photograph, the original Western Business Solutions team. Just George Thompson, Mark himself looking much younger, and 2 other early employees, standing proudly, perhaps a little awkwardly, in front of that tiny, windowless first office from 15 years ago. Tucked behind the photo was a handwritten note on George's personal stationery. It read simply, "Mark, people sign contracts with people. Never forget that. Proud of you, George." Mark placed the framed photo prominently on his desk, where clients visiting his office would see it. A quiet, constant reminder of where it all started, of the principles that mattered, of the foundation upon which true success was built. Later that day, his schedule was packed with back-to-back calls and meetings, connecting with clients now formally under the umbrella of the new partnership, some originally from Apex, some from Summit. But these weren't crisis management calls or damage control sessions. They were just the normal, steady, relationship-building conversations that had been his bread and butter, his specialty, his quiet passion, for a decade and a half. As he picked up the phone to make his first call of the afternoon, Mark felt a sensation he hadn't truly experienced in a very long time, perhaps not since the early, ambitious days at Western Business Solutions. It was a feeling of deep, quiet, pure satisfaction. Not the fleeting thrill of winning some corporate battle, but the profound contentment that comes from knowing, deep down, that doing business the right way, the human way, still mattered. That it was, in fact, the only way that truly endured. In the end, Brendan Kelly, in his arrogant haste to modernize and cut costs, had unwittingly done Mark the biggest favor of his career. By trying to dismiss him, to replace him with someone younger, cheaper, he had inadvertently set the stage for Mark to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, just how incredibly valuable he, and the relationships he embodied, truly were. And that powerful, quiet realization? That was a form of redemption worth every single challenging step of the journey. And so, Mark's story reminds us, doesn't it? That true value often lies not in the noise we make, but in the quiet consistency of our integrity, in the strength of the bridges we build with others. It reminds us that sometimes, the universe has a way of rebalancing the scales, not through loud vengeance, but through the steady, undeniable weight of character and earned trust. It's a testament to playing the long game, to believing in the power of human connection even when the world seems obsessed with shortcuts and quick fixes. If this story resonated with you, perhaps sparked a memory or a feeling about your own journey, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We learn so much from hearing each other's perspectives. And if you'd like to continue walking with us through more stories like Mark's, stories of quiet strength, unexpected turns, and the enduring power of the human spirit, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here, sharing these journeys together. And for those who feel moved to support our mission of telling these important stories, you can use the Super Thanks feature. Giving, as we know, can be a part of healing and blessing, both for the giver and the receiver. Thank you, truly, for listening. We'll be back soon with another story.